Hello, Leading Across Cultures classmates. I'm Riley, up here in Columbus, Georgia. I'm a visual learner, so I'm pretty excited and looking forward to everybody else's videos. I'm pretty monotone, so I'm going to do my best to keep things rolling during this presentation. And I don't actually have a webcam on my computer, so I'm doing this on my iPhone for the beginning and the end. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. Today we'll be looking at the cultural comparison between China and America through the lens of Hofstede's cultural dimensions. So the main objectives of this presentation is to briefly give you some facts about China, compare China and America's cultural scores in the Hofstede model, and then once we get those down pat, we're going to talk about the scenario of an American expatriate manager being embedded in China with native Chinese workers. I'm going to talk about how the communication, teamwork, and motivation are going to be different between these two cultures and give the manager some tips on how he can get on the same page with his workers. Then we're going to wrap it all up. I'm going to share the biblical view of the cultural differences between these two nations. China is located in East Asia. It is a large country and borders 14 other nations including Russia, Mongolia, North Korea, Bhutan, Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, Nepal, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. China is the world's most populous country at 1.33 billion and is only growing. It is also the third largest country in the world at 3.7 million miles. The capital is Beijing, also known as the Forbidden City, and it's located right here. Most of China's citizens live in the east of the country in the coastal regions and also live in large urban areas. China has 160 cities with over 1 million people residing in each of them. Where there are people, they're everywhere. There's literally millions of them. China has a huge amount of area, and it also has a very diverse geography and climate. On China's western border in the highly scrutinized region of Tibet lies Mount Everest. China also has deserts and bamboo jungles, which are home to the world's laziest bears, the pandas. The Chinese economy runs on manufacturing. Almost everything is manufactured in China now, from the shirt I'm wearing to the iPhone I shot my video with this morning. Agriculture is also a large part of China's economy, but it lacks the resources to supply the massive amount of people in its border and must purchase large quantities of food from other countries like the US and South America. The third largest cog in the Chinese economy is shipping and exporting. These manufactured goods have to go somewhere, so China ships them all over the world. The largest religion in China is non-religion, with about 50% of the culture practicing this. The other major religions include Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Islam, and Christianity. As a sidebar, Christianity is about 7 to 9% of the population and is steadily on the rise, praise God. Confucianism was founded in China around 500 BC. This philosophy shapes everyday culture in China. It determines how social interactions are set up, how business is conducted, and how the family unit works at home. China is a communist state and is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. At the head of the CCP is Xi Jinping, seen here with President Obama. He is known as either the General Secretary of the CCP or the President. China is the world's second strongest economy and also has the world's second strongest military. America is number one in both of these categories, but China is hungry to take the top position in both of these rankings. As far as personal freedoms in China, things are becoming slightly more free market as far as the economy is based, and less government backed, but there is still a large amount of oversight and restriction to what the Chinese people can do with their everyday lives. For example, less freedom on the internet than normal Americans, no public displays of faith, and a government that does not allow more than 2 children per household, which is a plus because 3 years ago they were only allowing 1 child per household. Now we're getting into Dr. Hofstede's 6 cultural dimensions. Dr. Hofstede describes culture as being the collective programming of the mind distinguishing members of one group or category from another, or in a more picturesque description, the collective programming of those things shared by the same people who grew up in the same forest. His 6 cultural dimensions that we're going to examine are power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. This diagram would be the 10,000-foot view of Hofstede's cultural dimensions between China and America. As you can see, there's some pretty significant differences between these cultures, and it would be pretty difficult to jump into either one of these countries feet first, coming from the other, without having a little bit of prior knowledge of how and why a culture does what. So I'm going to take you through each of these dimensions and just try to better equip you on what to do when you're in the Chinese culture. The first dimension we're going to look at is power distance. It's defined as the degree of inequality that exists and is accepted between people with and without power. So in layman's terms, this level determines if a culture values some people more than it values others. China has a very high PDI score of 80, so the more senior a person is, the more respected and honored they would be. Confucianism breaks down these relationships between a boss and an employee, or a master and a servant. Loyalty, sense of duty, and respect for age are all highly valued. In China, managers receive little input from their subordinates because they are below them. But in America, where we have a PDI score of 40, workers and managers have a similar equality in the workplace and in society. In corporate America, decisions are sometimes made by committee by garnering input from both higher and lower management. In this picture, you can visually see the difference between a high PDI score and a low PDI score. Something else that the Chinese also practice is filial piety. It's the practice of honoring older people and giving preferential treatment to elders, even if the younger person deserves it or is more qualified. Individualism refers to the strength of the ties that people have to others within their community. China has a low score of 20 in this category and represents an extreme collectivist society. This means they put the group first and themselves second. America scored the highest in this group at 91. This represents a highly individualistic society, putting an emphasis on personal responsibility and having few close relationships besides family and friends. This dimension has the greatest variation between China and America. The collectivist culture frown upon losing face in society. For example, an individualist-minded worker is motivated out of their best interest by working harder to achieve a performance bonus for themselves. In a collectivist culture, this is viewed as greedy and selfish because it exposes the weak links in the workforce and shines a spotlight on others' shortcomings. Something else we're going to be talking about soon is guanxi. It's very important, but stay tuned. I'm going to go into great depths soon. Masculinity refers to how much the society sticks with and values traditional male and female roles. Or in other terms, masculine roles do what is necessary, even if it's unenjoyable, and feminine roles do what makes us happy to be fulfilled. Both American and Chinese workers will be very similar with their scores being 62 and 66 respectively. Both cultures will put business first and family second, and go wherever the job is needed to provide for their family. The Chinese people have always taken pride in being highly developed in multiple facets of life, like philosophy, business, and trade. Over the past few centuries, even to this day, they regard themselves as the center of human civilization. The LTO, or long-term orientation, refers to how much society values long-standing as opposed to short-term standing traditions and values. This is the second largest cultural difference in score when comparing America with a low LTO of 26 and China with a very high score of 87. China is much more interested in long-term goals and achievement. They tend to be more future-oriented by saving now to reap rewards later, and that truth is relative to every situation. America, on the other hand, tends to be very present-oriented and follows a strict code of what is right and what is wrong, regardless of the situation. The reason that the Chinese have such a high LTO score is because they are a very old culture, dating back to the Qi dynasty in 1994 BC. That makes them almost 4,000 years old, whereas America as we know it is only 240 years old. American strategists plan about 3 to 5 years into the future, while Chinese strategic planners plan about 100 or more years into the future. Take for example the Great Wall of China. It was started under construction in 445 BC and has been added to and built onto until 1644 AD. Multiple generations, countless amounts of treasure, multiple kingdoms have built this, all with the sole purpose of protecting China throughout the centuries. Uncertainty avoidance deals with the degree of anxiety that society members feel in uncertain or unknown situations. China has a very low score of 30 in this category. They have a fluid business structure and they are very open to change and risk. They're more concerned with the long-term strategy than the day-to-day operations of a business. Take for example, if a company's stock falls. They're not too concerned if that price is down a few dollars or a few points in one day, but they're more concerned about what's going to happen for the long term. Are they going to be around the next 10 to 15 years? That's more what Chinese investors and what Chinese business people are looking at. Indulgence deals with how people control their desires and impulses based on the way that they were raised. China has a very low score in indulgence at 24, while America's very high score of 68 represents a very indulgent culture. A lower IND score tends to value leisure time less, be more pessimistic, and spend more time working to secure their future. Indulgent countries are very present and in the moment, while low-scoring cultures like China, for example, save now and wait for the larger payoff down the road. If I could only present one slide through this whole presentation, this would be the one. Guanxi is so important to the Chinese culture. It's a tight-knit relationship built between groups and individuals. And how it came about was all the way from back even before 1994 BC. There was always a new warlord or a new king ruling over the Chinese people. And they all had their own philosophies, their own ideas of how life should be. So there was never one consistent rule of law. Confucius actually coined the term, and it is still important and taught in the Chinese culture today. So what this means in real world terms is someone with Guanxi means they're looking out for their neighbor's best interests, even above their own, and their neighbors doing the same for them. Like I stated earlier, most of China's population is extremely crowded in urban environments. People are everywhere, and I mean literally everywhere, and there's little privacy to be enjoyed. But luckily, little privacy is needed once Guanxi is established, so that's always good. As an expat working with the Chinese, there are some very similar things I'll need to modify in my everyday life when it comes to teamwork, motivation, and communication. For example, I'd set group goals instead of individual goals. Individual goals leave the opportunity for a worker to lose face by not meeting the task or not meeting the goal. This dishonors the worker. I also want to build Guanxi with my contemporaries and my subordinates by showing that I have their back and they can have mine. I also want to do life with my contemporaries outside of work by going out to eat or doing a sporting event, just showing that we can have a life outside of work together. The one thing I would caution guys with teamwork is be mindful of the distance between management above and below, and not to disrupt the power distance dimension, because this is very strict in the Chinese culture. Fun fact, there's over 5,000 KFCs in China, so you could definitely go get some of the Colonel's chicken with your contemporaries. Communication is vital in China. When making an introduction, shake hands with everyone, not just the most important. Have business cards in English and Mandarin, and take time to study those that were given to you. Don't be in a rush. Build guanxi with your acquaintances. Be friends first and the business will come second. Be prepared and show that you're ready to take on any challenge where the meeting takes you. Be cautious of going and speaking with managers or higher ups. As mentioned before, power distance is very important in the Chinese culture. Motivating the Chinese workers will not be difficult. They are extremely driven. One important thing to note is that public criticism is not popular or fun here in the US, but in China it is mortifying, and the quickest way to demoralize your workers by making them lose face, by showing their shortcomings. Motivate the team by showing where we can go together and where we can end up after we do all the hard work. Set long-term goals that don't hinge on day-to-day operations of success or failure. Lastly, we're going to talk about the biblical perspective. Guanxi, in my mind, is directly mirrored in Mark 12:31, where we are called to love our neighbor as ourselves. This truly is putting them first. And secondly, and all those who believed were together and had all things in common, and they began selling their property and possessions and were sharing them with all, as anyone might have need. Acts 2:44 through 45. This ties in with the collectivist ideal that only looking out for ourselves is selfish if we completely disregard others. If someone needs something, do what it takes to help them out. And to bring it all together, workers from each culture will have a better idea of how and why we think and act after watching this. The more time we spend together, the more we will shape and influence one another, the more guanxi we will have together. Our major differences are huge, but will allow us as an organization to grow stronger by allowing us to work together. Thanks, I hope you enjoyed this and learned something from this presentation, and I hope you have a great rest of your journey getting your degree at Southeastern.